Welcome to our first presentation of the International Animal Rights Conference 2013, which will be given by Kim Stallwood. Kim has been actively involved in the work of several animal advocacy organizations in the UK and the United States for more than 35 years. In his presentation, Kim will make the case that animal activists must expand their worldview from activism to also include advocacy. Further, he argues that the animal rights movement needs to see itself as a social movement in order for animal activists to understand social change. So please welcome Kim Stallwood.
Bianca, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for everyone for attending. I want to start by congratulating the organizers and everyone involved with the conference. It's a very impressive event and very well run event, and I wish you success in further endeavors. I also want to note the fact that it wasn't until I got here earlier today that we're actually meeting in what was a slaughterhouse. And it's kind of thrilling but shocking that we're in such a place that once killed animals, and here we are talking about liberating animals. So there's a good indication of some progress being made there. In thinking about the presentation that I was making today, I had decided to give a talk which is going to be without any audiovisual material whatsoever. I am going to present a paper, and this paper was published in an academic journal called Relations, and the paper is called The Politics of Animal Rights Advocacy. The paper is available on the website of the academic journal called Relations, and is also available on my own website. And the reason why I've chosen to make the presentation this way is because I felt that this paper encapsulated most succinctly everything that I wanted to say today, and it just seemed the best way for me to get my ideas across cogently is to go through this paper. And the paper is broken down into an introduction and a conclusion, but with three primary areas. I'm going to talk about the animal industrial complex, the politics of animal rights advocacy, and a new strategy for the animal rights movement. So the main aim of this paper is to make the case that the politics of animal rights advocacy rests with establishing the moral and legal rights of animals as a public policy issue. Presently, animal rights is primarily framed as an optional lifestyle choice. It is not understood as a matter for mainstream politics, including public policy, the policies of political parties, regulations, and legislation. Starting with Barbara Noski's concept of the animal industrial complex, I consider the present status of the many traditions, cultural norms, economic and other incentives which license our instrumental use of animals for human gain. I propose a 5-part evaluation process of social movements and use it to evaluate the modern animal rights movement. I critique its present strategy with its emphasis on personal lifestyle choice as inadequate in challenging the animal industrial complex. I conclude the modern animal rights movement must implement a long-term strategy which advances animal issues as public policy, which is in addition to its present strategy promoting optional vegan cruelty-free lifestyle choice. Now, the publication of Animal Liberation by Peter Singer in 1975 is usually recognized as the start of the animal rights movement. It was not until 1983 and the publication of The Case for Animal Rights by Tom Regan that a rights-based argument for animals was made. While agreeing with Singer that animals are sentient, Regan rejected utilitarianism as animal interests always run the risk of being trumped by human needs. Philosophers such as Singer and Reagan influenced the animal rights movement in its understanding of the moral and legal status of animals. The animal rights movement sought to influence public opinion, encourage vegan, cruelty-free living, change public policy, and pass laws. Notwithstanding almost a half-century of animal activism, particularly the promotion of vegan, cruelty-free living, the human exploitation of other animals is unabated. The animal rights movement has yet to challenge in any meaningful way the animal industrial complex. The animal industrial complex is the term used to describe the many traditions, institutions, and industries which transform animals into products and services for human consumption. Debate about the politics of animal rights advocacy is necessary to inform the animal rights movement of the way in which it can successfully challenge the animal rights complex. The main aim that I put forward today is to make the case that ending the use of animals in such areas as agriculture, entertainment, and research is the responsibility of society as a matter of public policy. So now I want to look at the animal industrial complex. Anthropologist Barbara Noske first identified the animal industrial complex as the accumulation of interests responsible for institutionalized animal exploitation. She wrote that animals have become reduced to mere appendages of computers and machines. The presence of the animal industrial complex is so pervasive that its existence often goes unrecognized and unacknowledged. Two turning points signify the shift in human attitudes toward animals and their institutionalized exploitation. The first is Chicago and its stockyards and slaughterhouses, which operated from 1865 for some 100 years. The second turning point occurred after World War II, when traditional extensive farming practices were replaced by intensive industrial production to produce meat, eggs, and dairy. The Chicago stockyards and factory farming are two primary examples of the animal industrial complex and how, since the Industrial Revolution, it commodified the production, slaughter, and consumption of billions of animals. Underpinning the animal industrial complex are Western Orthodox Judeo-Christian religious belief systems and the materialism of scientific reductionism. They reinforce human prejudice in its assumption that other animals exist for human use. Religion and science also provided a foundation to patriarchy, which situated man as superior to women, children, animals, and nature. Embedded within patriarchy is the notion of the other. Women, children, animals, and nature are the other. Simone de Beauvoir, in The Second Sex, wrote that he is the subject, he is the absolute, she is the other. As women are the other to men, so animals are the other to humans. Otherness empowers power and control, which licenses exploitation. As misogyny is the hatred of women by men, misothry is human hatred and contempt for animals. Otherness also causes invisibility. Carol Adams describes in The Sexual Politics of Meat the presence of animals in meat as the absent referent. The meat on a plate can range in appearance from the explicit, that is, one entire fish cooked and served whole, to the implicit, which is to say ground beef in a burger made from multiple animals. Ultimately, these norms and values produce lebensunwerte Leben, or life unworthy of life. The animal industrial complex renders the lives of animals as life unworthy of life. Animal exploitation, as an established and accepted practice, perpetuates and legitimizes itself while hiding from the consequences of its actions. the true economic consequences of animal exploitation are not met by the animal industrial complex, but by consumers and society. The animal industrial complex is also enabled with government-approved programs, such as trade agreements, financial incentives, tax credits, exemptions from the law, whose costs are met again by taxpayers. The animal industrial complex favors privatization and government deregulation to ensure it supervises itself with voluntary standards. The priority for the animal industrial complex is to protect its profits and other entitlements. The animal industrial complex has a self-interest in overstating the benefits to its exploitation of animals. It wishes to manipulate public opinion to fear any change in their use of animals. As Noski asks, which human needs are being fulfilled and whose interests are promoted by the existing animal industrial complex? It is doubtful that all of the products and services derived from animal exploitation are essential for our survival. Of course, when asked about animal rights, people are going to express concern about giving up any pleasure, for example, eating meat, or losing any benefit, for example, safe products, they may feel is their prerogative. But the deeper people's understanding, particularly in areas considered egregious, for example, fox hunting, testing of cosmetics on animals, the less fear there is of a loss of pleasure or benefit. Sympathy for animals when they are particularly cruelly treated and when there is a willingness to forego any perceived or real benefits by the public is demonstrated in the public support for legislation and other public policy measures restricting or prohibiting animal cruelty and exploitation. Now, the dominance of the animal industrial complex is emboldened by the animal rights movement, particularly with its emphasis on vegan cruelty-free living. While it does deserve recognition for ending some egregious use of animals and taking advantage of the opportunities for new markets in consumerism, for example, meat-free, vegetarian, and cruelty-free vegan, the animal industrial complex does so without any commitment to ending its institutionalized violence toward animals. This has the effect of weakening the animal rights movement's call for moral and legal rights for animals by ensuring the problem of animal exploitation remains as an optional personal lifestyle choice. While genuine cooperation between the animal rights movement and the animal industrial complex is an important strategy, the former must avoid being used by the latter, even unwittingly, to legitimize and even perpetuate institutionalized animal exploitation. Political campaigns which call for public policy to end animal exploitation will mobilize vast financial resources from the animal industrial complex to ensure its profitable use of animals survives. There is, of course, enormous profits to be made from animal exploitation. These profits are protected by existing arrangements with governments and their regulatory mechanisms, thereby ensuring the continuation of animal exploitation. The animal industrial complex has a proven history of collusion with private security forces and state law enforcement to monitor, pervert, and harm the animal rights movement. It is therefore not surprising that animal-related public policy, as it currently exists, is more about protecting our interests in what we do to them than in protecting them from us. Animals are represented in public policy by those who benefit from the power and control they exert over them. Animal researchers, not anti-vivisectionists, and animal farmers, not vegans, are more likely to be members of the policy-making networks which determine regulations and laws governing our relations with animals. So that is my section where I've laid out how I see our opponent as I characterize it as the animal industrial complex. So now I want to turn to the politics of animal rights advocacy. The emphasis placed by the animal rights movement in the strategy to convince everyone to adopt a vegan, cruelty-free lifestyle suggests that it sees itself as a moral crusade. Generally, moral crusades are one specific issue which is framed as an exclusive cause with extraordinary meaning, embedding a religious, spiritual, political, or moral belief as an integral component. Moral crusades rely upon campaigns which trigger moral shocks to provoke public debate. An extraordinary situation or conflict which may receive unprecedented attention from the public or the media, or both, may be called a moral panic. Moral crusades can be controversial issues relating to lifestyle choice, alcohol consumption and recreation or illegal drug use, for example, sexual activity, pornography, homosexuality, monogamy, or issues of individual freedom, abortion, euthanasia, death penalty. Generally, moral crusades are social movements whose missions address fundamental and profound issues relating to human activity, the relationship humans have with their perception of themselves and their place in society. The animal rights movement at present behaves more like a moral crusade than a social movement with its emphasis on personal lifestyle choice. Sociologists Jeff Goodwin and James Jasper define social movements as collective, organized, sustained, and non-institutional challenges to authorities, power holders, cultural beliefs, and practices. We are a social movement. The animal rights movement is a social movement. The academic study of social movements by sociologists and political scientists and political theorists offers insight into the animal rights movement as a social movement. Further, the writings of social movement practitioners, studies, histories, biographies, and memoirs also provides lessons to learn from their experiences. For example, the animal rights literature includes biographies and movement studies and histories. And I can always provide examples for that later. Further, sociologists and political scientists include the animal rights movement in their research. And there's also examples there which I can share with you. Now, in his book called Eco-Wars, political scientist Ronald Libby discusses analysis of the animal rights movement by Bill Rempel, who is a research scientist in animal agribusiness at the Department of Animal Science at the University of Minnesota. Rempel makes the case that the industry, that is the animal industrial complex, the animal industrial complex perception of the political influence of animal rights groups passes through 4 stages. The animal rights movement develops, politicizes, legislates, and litigates an issue. But from my experience with the animal rights movement, I conclude that Rempel was partially correct, and I have adapted his 4-stage analysis to this 5-stage analysis. So I'll say what the 5 stages are, then I'll say briefly what each one represents. The first is public education. The second is public policy development. The third is legislation. The fourth is implementation. And the fifth is public acceptance. So these 5 stages again. First, public education. This is when people are enlightened about the issue and embrace it into their lives. The second is public policy development. This is when political parties, businesses, schools, professional associations, and other entities that constitute society adopt sympathetic positions on the issue. So examples would be cosmetic manufacturers who adopt a non-animal testing policy, for example. That would be one example. The third stage is legislation, and this is clearly when laws are passed on an issue. The fourth stage is the implementation, when laws and other public policy instruments are enforced on the issue. And then last, the fifth stage, is public acceptance. This is when the issue is embedded into the values of society. This is when everyone goes around saying, well, this is what we always thought all along, or I can't believe we once used to think X. So this is the lifespan of a successful social movement, going through each of these 5 stages as it emerges from obscurity to acceptance. The 5-stage analysis makes it possible to determine which stage is reached by a social movement, what is next, and why some organizations and issues fail, stagnate, or succeed. Most issues start in stage 1, public education, and expand to the others, but not always in a clear sequential order. For any social movement to achieve its mission, it must pass through each of the 5 stages and maintain an active engagement in each one. In doing so, its ability to resist setbacks, obstacles, and opposition from opponents, in our case, the animal-industrial complex, is diminished increasingly. In other words, as a social movement expands its presence in each stage while maintaining activities in each one, the power and control that the opposition may wield against it is weakened. The 5 stages illustrate the transition that animal advocates must make from moral crusader to political activist, and the animal rights movement from a moral crusade to political movement. We can never assume a growing collective of personal lifestyle change automatically leads to institutional societal change. The capriciousness of human nature is subject to change. People change their minds. Some people don't change their minds, but many people do change their minds. Institutionalized regulations and laws are much more entrenched expressions of society's values. I conclude the animal rights movement is mostly in stage 1, public education, with some presence in stages 2, public policy, 3, legislation, and 4, implementation. If stages 1 and 2 are the moral crusade, stages 3 and 4 are the political movement. Inevitably, the animal rights movement confronts the animal-industrial complex because of its instrumental use of animals. The arenas in which this conflict is played out include public opinion, public policy, legislation, law, and society generally. But the animal rights movement is not competent for these encounters. Its understanding of the animal-industrial complex and institutional animal exploitation is limited mostly to optional personal lifestyle choice. Animal rights is not understood as a mainstream political issue. This, I think, is our greatest challenge, is to make animal rights a mainstream political issue. In contrast to the animal rights movement, the animal-industrial complex, which does understand the politics of animal exploitation, is resolutely entrenched and fully engaged in all 5 stages. Our opponents are fully engaged in all 5 stages. Which stage would the animal-industrial complex want the animal rights movement to be in? Its answer would be the stage we currently occupy, stage 1, public education. Further, it will do everything in its power to ensure the animal rights movement maintains this position. This is because the first stage is the beginning and the stage with least influence of all 5 stages. So now I want to turn to what do we do with all of this. So I'm going to outline a new strategy for the animal rights movement. Why is the animal rights movement entrenched in stage 1? The answer lies in how people become animal advocates. With the exception of those who were raised by vegans or vegetarians and educated about animal cruelty and exploitation, people become animal advocates because they experience a personal, transformative moment. Everyone who is an advocate for animals has a compelling personal story. These unique narratives describe how they were transformed from someone who ate meat and fish to a vegetarian or vegan. Personal transformative moments may be triggered by a variety of experiences, including reading a book, watching a film, speaking with a friend, witnessing animal cruelty, experiencing a profound relationship with a companion animal, and so on. Philosopher Tom Regan describes in his book, Empty Cages, 3 types of animal advocates. They are the Damascan, the muddler, and the Da Vincian. I'll explain what each 3 are now. So the Damascan, D-A-M-A-S-C-A-N, the Damascan has a startling revelation, the road to Damascus. They have a startling revelation. The muddler struggles with the challenge of animal rights throughout their life. And the Da Vincian, that's named after Leonardo da Vinci, the Da Vincian intuitively understood animal rights all along. It was born in innate with them. So Regan argues that there are 3 types of animal rights personalities: the Damascan, who has a startling revelation, the muddler, who struggles with the challenge of animal rights throughout their life, and the Da Vincian, who intuitively knew all along. Ken Shapiro, who's a psychologist and colleague, also characterizes animal advocates as caring sleuths who discover, seek, and embrace the suffering of animals. We embody the animal's suffering. These various personality types help to illustrate who animal advocates are, who we are, and how we each arrive from different places. Also, they help to explain why animal advocates are a diverse group of people who do not always agree. The personal transformative moment is powerful, so compelling, in fact, that it overwhelmingly informs the rationale of most of the animal rights movement's current strategy to educate the public. This is why the calendar of the animal rights movement falls mostly into stage 1, public education. That is to say, media stunts, information dissemination, demonstrations, advertising campaigns, personal appeals by celebrities, and so on. These are all attempts by us to influence people, essentially to go vegan. By emphasizing personal lifestyle choice over institutional change, the animal rights movement pursues a strategy which I believe is not fit for purpose and impedes severely our ability to achieve institutional change. A new strategy which, with equal emphasis in action at the level of the individual and society, is needed. The animal rights movement only then will be in a better position to succeed in achieving its mission and confronting the animal industrial complex. Framing animal rights as a political movement emphasizes a strategy which moves from the individual to society, an approach that includes public policy, legislation, and law enforcement. This choice in strategy is reflected in how its mission is viewed. Generally, animal rights is seen as a demand for individual lifestyle choice. In contrast, a political movement for animals calls for the transformation of society and its relationship with animals. It's customary to portray Britain as a nation of animal lovers. From its origins in the 1800s to the 1970s, the public supported a social movement for animals whose dominant ideology was animal welfare. Britain's timid but sincere animal welfare movement tried to make itself relevant in the swinging 60s with its traditional message of kindness to animals. But the 1970s was a decade of political and social unrest. It saw the emergence of such political ideologies and social movements as feminism, environmentalism, peace, multiculturalism, and gay liberation. it was perhaps inevitable that the animal rights movement would also be established in the 1970s as a social movement to accomplish animal liberation. Animal welfare organizations, including the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the RSPCA, were forced to respond to these changing times and the increasing presence of animal rights. Animal welfare supporters, who were mostly middle-class women, found themselves confronted by a new wave of animal rights advocates who were younger men and women. Many were working class. They were not afraid to challenge traditions. They were vegetarians and vegans. They spoke of animal rights. They sabotaged fox hunts, demonstrated against circuses with performing animals, and broke into research laboratories, causing property damage and liberating rats, mice, and dogs. The ideology of the modern social movement for animals includes individuals, local groups, and national, international organizations who work together sometimes, but often do not. The movement includes two primary ideological camps, animal welfare and animal rights. But to view the movement as just as a welfare rights divide is, I believe, to simplify a complex social movement and overlook its most important challenge. Notwithstanding the ideological complexity and the factional constitution of the animal rights movement, we are making progress in educating the public about moral and legal status of animals, and to a much lesser extent, influencing public opinion, elected representatives, and so on. The challenge of the politics of animal rights advocacy is to understand why the social movement for animals persists in focusing more on public opinion than the law, more on the individual than on the institutional, societal level. Personal lifestyle choice rather than institutional social change. For many years, Robert Garner has stood as the primary political theorist exploring the political status of animals. His current research considers society's treatment of animals within the context of justice and the application of an ideal and non-ideal theory to animal ethics. New research in the political status of animals is being led by political theorists, and I think this is one of the most exciting areas of animal rights theory that's being developed now. Two examples of books that I would recommend. One is by an author called Siobhan O'Sullivan. Her book is called Animals, Equality and Democracy. And more importantly, I'd recommend a book called Zoopolis, which is Zoopolis. And the authors are Sue Donaldson and Will Kimlicker. And I can give you the details afterwards. O'Sullivan makes the case that the existing inconsistencies within the law relating to animals should be addressed. For example, laws relating to dogs as companion animals and research tools are different. Clearly, this difference reflects the nature of the relationship between dogs and people. One is a companion animal, the other is a research tool. The law which established the highest standard of animal welfare should be applied consistently wherever the law relates to that species, regardless of the circumstances. In other words, the law should be the same for the same species in different circumstances. So, for example, if the law for dogs in the home is at a very high level, and the law for dogs in a research laboratory is at a very correspondingly low level, if law for dogs was consistently at the highest level, it would significantly impact the way in which dogs would be used in research. It may even result in it becoming prohibitively difficult to use dogs in research. And that is the argument that O'Sullivan makes. The approach that Donaldson and Kimlicker make in Zoopolis is to apply political theories on citizenship for animals. Our varied relationship with animals have their own moral complexities, which have in turn political consequences. I'd like to have time to go into that and what they spell out in Zoopolis, and maybe we can do that in the question and answer afterwards. Or if you want to talk with me after the talk, I'd be happy to do so, but there isn't time at the moment. But the debate about animal ethics engaged by Singer and Reagan initially is now being augmented by the debate about politics and animals made by these political theorists who I'm citing. It is one thing to claim moral rights for animal rights. It's something else to persuade society and its representational governments to recognize legal rights for animals, including enforcement by the state with its legal apparatus. So then in my conclusion, I want to say briefly, most, if not all, social movements struggle with the question of fundamentalism and realpolitik, or abolition and regulation. Often they fail to resolve it successfully, and I think that we're no exception. Frequently, this tension is framed as an exclusive choice. I do not support this view. Both are needed to help the other achieve the change they seek. The challenge is to learn how to direct strategies simultaneously and complementarily. This is why animal rights is more than just a moral crusade pursuing idealistic goals of abolition. It is also a pragmatic social movement working to embed the values of animal rights into public policy. The politics of animal rights advocacy informs not only the debate about the nature of the present and moral legal status of animals, but also how to embed those values of animal rights into society. Thank you.
So we have about 10 minutes left for questions. Does anyone have a question? No questions? I'll come to you in a second, okay?
Thank you very much for your lecture. I enjoyed it very much. I wanted to ask you, what would be the practical methods of turning the animal rights movement into a political movement if we agree to your 5-stage theory?
Thank you for the question. The easiest way to answer it is to say that we need to get involved directly into the political process. We need to join political parties. I'm not advocating a political party, but I would recommend that people join the political party of their choice and work from within that political party to get that party to adopt pro-animal policies, to seek candidates who have been enlightened about the animal issue and sympathetic to that issue to get them elected. Within the last few days, a very good example has been in New York, where there's been a candidate for mayor defeated to a large extent because she was hostile to animal rights, and in particular was very supportive of carriage horses through the streets of Manhattan around Central Park. And a group of animal rights people organized a campaign to get her not elected, not selected, and they drove her vote down. And this has been recognized in the press because they've accomplished this. And what this does is that it sends a message saying that when people who vote and decide to vote, that they'll also make a determination as to who they will vote for based on the candidates and the party's position on animal rights.
Okay, so there was another question here somewhere. You.
I just wanted to ask again for the titles of the books which you gave at the end. So it was Animal Equality and...
The first book is Animals, Equality and Democracy. The author is Shibborn, which is S-I-O-B-H-A-N, O'Sullivan, O''S-U-L-L-I-V-A-N, Shibborn O'Sullivan. She's in Australia. And the second book is Zoopolis, Z-O-O-P-O-L-I-S, has a subtitle which is A Political Theory of Animal Rights. And the authors, the last names are Donaldson and Kimlicka. Kimlicka is K-Y-M-L-I-C-K-A. Kimlicka is a political scientist in Canada. Zoopolis is an outstanding book. I highly recommend it.
Okay, thank you. So are there any more questions? I'll go to her first and then I'll come to you, okay?
I just wanted to ask, because with the 5 stages, you compared the animal rights movement to other social movements, but isn't there a fundamental difference that animals are property, and so we can't advocate for the rights of animals in the same way since they're not legal persons? And I have a background in economics, and it seems clear to me that in a capitalist society they will be exploited in a profit-maximizing way. So that's my question.
I don't think the property issue excludes the argument of the 5 stages. I mean, I think that the property issue of the property status of animals is a key issue. I don't deny that, but I don't think it necessarily negates the argument I'm making about these 5 stages. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Do you want to ask something else, or does it answer your question? Yeah? Okay. They had a question here. And then you had a question?
I would like to know what do you think about the movement for the abolition of meat? I don't know if you heard about it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I would like to know what's your opinion about the movement for the abolition of meat.
The abolition of what?
Of meat.
Meat?
Meat.
Well, I'm all for it. I'm not sure if I understand what you say when you say, other than the obvious, the abolition of meat. I am all, as a vegan of 30 plus years, I'm all for the abolition of meat. What I've tried to lay out here is an analysis and a proposal of how to go about making meat, for example, a similar product as tobacco and alcohol is now viewed. I mean, one important strategy, to answer the gentleman's question, the first question, an important strategy that we could pursue to politicize the issue of animals is to campaign to position the consumption of meat, eggs and dairy along the same continuum as the consumption of tobacco and alcohol. That's not necessarily raising the ethical argument, but it's raising the impact of the argument on society. Can society afford to sustain the consumption of products which are incredibly costly and wasteful?
Okay, we have one more question.
Thank you. Hello, Kim. Yeah. You just said to a guy earlier on that it's an idea to join up with a political party and try and change, you know what I mean, from within a political party. And I've got a bit of a problem with that because I can't stand politics, you know, like there's not one political party that I'd like to vote for. I don't feel comfortable, you know, I don't feel there's enough support. I don't feel that we're really taken seriously. What's the chances of animal rights movement forming their own political party?
There are 2 questions there, I think. First off, I'm not saying that everyone has to join a political party. If the world of politics is not for you, then don't get involved with it. I'm not saying that everyone here has to join a political party. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. It's as simple as that. Do something else. But if you do have that leaning and that interest, then I do encourage you to do it. Now, as far as political parties specifically on animals, this is going to get me into hot water. I don't support them because I feel they help to compartmentalize the animal rights issue as a single issue on its own. And I believe what we need to do is situate the issue of animal rights within a broader, larger, progressive context so that it's seen alongside other issues and it's embedded into the values of those political parties. Having said that, I'm not going to stop or dissuade anyone from being involved with a political party for animals. If that's what you want to do, then go ahead and do it. But as a strategy, and personally, I don't advocate it, and I don't do it.
Okay, so we have time for one short question, I think. Does anyone else have a question? No? Okay. Then I'd like to thank Kim for his talk. Thank you.